She didn't mean for her life to change that morning. All Grace Holloway meant to do was protect a group of children crossing the street, until a Ferrari came roaring toward them, and fear made her throw a single stone that shattered far more than a windshield. In the stunned silence that followed, her quiet life began to crack open. Because sometimes, the moment you try to stop a disaster becomes the moment that rewrites your entire future. And the arrogant millionaire who stepped out of that car, the man the whole town whispered about, the man whose pride shattered along with the glass, he would soon become the one person capable of breaking her heart, or saving it. But before they ever stood side by side, everything in her world had to fall apart first. Stay with this story, because the twist behind that thrown rock is only the beginning. The sound came first, a low, rising growl that didn't belong on a quiet street in early October. Grace Holloway felt it before she saw anything, a vibration in the cool Minnesota air that made her pause mid-step, a cardboard box of donated paperbacks balanced against her hip. Sharper, hungrier. Kids spilled out of the elementary school across the street, jackets half-zipped, backpacks bouncing against small shoulders. Their laughter floated above the orange and gold leaves skittering across the pavement. The crossing guard lifted his sign, but he was turned halfway toward a teacher asking him something. The line of children began inching toward the crosswalk, trusting adults to keep them safe. Grace shifted the box in her arms. "Hold on, sweethearts," she murmured, more to herself than anyone else. Something in her chest tightened. Then she saw it. A flash of red careening down Maple Hill, sleek, low, gleaming like a drop of blood sliding toward the lake. A Ferrari, in Maple Ridge, and moving far too fast. 45? Maybe more. In a 25 zone, for one split second, her brain offered logic. He'll slow down. People always slow down near the school, but he didn't. The car roared closer, engine revving, sunlight flickering across its polished hood. Kids stepped off the curb. The world narrowed. The breeze stilled. Grace felt something cold grip the base of her spine. No time to yell. No time to run. Just time to choose. She dropped the box. Paperbacks exploded across the pavement. Louise Penny, Steinbeck, a tattered Bible some widow had donated earlier that morning. Her feet moved on instinct, her body ahead of thought. She lunged toward the small landscaping bed beside the library sidewalk. Her hand closed around a smooth, heavy, stone fist-sized, perfect weight. She didn't plan, didn't aim. She just threw. The rock cut through the air with a thud that felt like a heartbeat. It struck dead center of the Ferrari's windshield. The crack sounded like a gunshot. The car screamed in protest, brakes locking, tires skidding sideways. The smell of burning rubber filled the air. Children yelped. A teacher gasped. A lunchbox hit the ground with a hollow plastic clap. The Ferrari lurched to a stop just mere feet from the painted crosswalk. For a long, trembling breath, nobody moved. Then everything happened at once. The kids burst backward in a panicked ripple. One little boy started crying. The teacher pulled them in, arms wide like a mother hen shielding chicks. Grace stood in the middle of Maple Street, chest heaving, hands shaking so violently she tucked them behind her jeans. The world rushed back in wind against her cheeks, the smell of pine, someone shouting her name from the library steps. And then the car door opened. He stepped out slowly, like a man unaccustomed to being interrupted, much less defied. Tall. Charcoal coat over a navy sweater, shoes that had never touched anything rougher than polished floor tile. His jaw ticked once. Sharp and furious. Samuel Whitlock. Even Grace recognized the name. The real estate millionaire who bought up waterfront property last spring. The man locals whispered about too rich, too distant, too uninterested in the lives unfolding around him. He looked at the crack across his windshield, at the rock fragments on the pavement, then at Grace. "Are you out of your mind?" His voice sliced through the autumn air. Her breath came in a ragged pull. "Are you blind? I was nowhere near those kids. You were doing 45 in a school zone," she snapped, pointing at the sign like it was scripture. "That crosswalk is for them. Not for men playing race car driver on a Tuesday afternoon." People were gathering now, parents, teachers, bystanders from the bakery across the street. Phones rose into the air like small, glowing witnesses. The millionaire straightened, anger radiating off him in cold waves. You destroyed $100,000 windshield. You almost destroyed children, Grace shot back. Your car can be fixed. Their bones can't. A murmur rustled through the crowd. Someone whispered, "Is that Whitlock? The guy who bought half the town?" Another muttered, "Serves him right." Sam's eyes narrowed, calculating now, as though he could already see the headlines forming. And he didn't like what they'd say. "You had no right to." "I had every right," Grace cut in, voice trembling but loud enough to carry. "When a car is flying toward a group of kids, anybody has the right to stop it." The wind lifted her hair, loose strands framing her flushed face. She looked small, standing there just a librarian with scuffed boots and a heart that bruised easily. But she didn't step back. Sam stepped forward. Too close. Grace could see her reflection in his eyes, wide, frightened, but firm. Someone recorded the moment she whispered, "You can fix a car. I can't fix a dead child." The street fell silent, as if the whole town inhaled at once. Her words hit harder than the rock. Sam stared at her, stunned into stillness. A teacher touched Grace's shoulder. "Grace, you okay?" She swallowed. "I'm fine." But her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Behind her, the cracked windshield glinted in the fading sunlight like a jagged wound, one she couldn't take back. One she wouldn't, even if she could. And as Sam Whitlock stepped backward, fury drained from his face and something colder settling in its place, she realized this moment was far from over. The town had seen everything, and so had he. This was only the beginning. Grace woke to the soft vibration of her phone rattling against the bedside table. It was barely 6 in the morning. Maple Ridge never stirred this early, not unless a storm was coming or deer wandered onto someone's porch. For a moment she lay still, tangled in blankets, listening to the wind brushing against the siding of her small apartment above the bakery. The air carried the faint smell of cinnamon rolls. The owners started preparing before dawn. The phone buzzed again. And again. She reached for it, eyes still half closed, expecting a message from the library board or a reminder about the senior book club. Instead, a flood of notifications lit her screen, bright enough to sting. Her name, over and over. Grace Holloway trending. The words didn't make sense until she opened one link. Then another. And another. The video that moment was everywhere. The rock leaving her hand. The shattering glass. Sam Whitlock's stunned fury as he stepped from his Ferrari. Her trembling voice saying, "You can fix a car. I can't fix a dead child." Someone had edited dramatic music beneath it. Number, library hero. Number, millionaire, menace. And, less kindly, number, crazy librarian. Grace sat up fast, heart pounding. A lump rose in her throat as she scrolled. Tens of thousands of views overnight. By breakfast, it would be hundreds of thousands. Some comments warmed her eyes with unexpected tears. She saved those kids. What courage. We need more people like her. But others hit with the sting of cold water. She overreacted. She could have caused an accident. Typical, small-town drama queen. A few were downright cruel, calling her unstable, dangerous, unprofessional. She closed the phone, letting it drop to the blanket. For a long moment, she stared at the ceiling, the shadows from the slanted roofline stretching across her room. She'd spent years rebuilding her reputation after that old misunderstanding at her previous job. Years of quiet work, kindness, dedication, and now, one decision, one stone thrown in a heartbeat of fear, was being dissected by strangers who knew nothing about her. A dull ache settled beneath her ribs. She dressed quickly, jeans, a soft sweater, boots she'd worn for 8 winters straight, and walked to the library before sunrise. The streets glistened with dew. A few early joggers passed, giving her curious, lingering looks. Inside, the familiar creak of the old wooden door greeted her. The building smelled of paper, dust, and the faint vanilla of aging pages. This place had always felt like a second skin, a refuge for anyone who needed it. And as the morning unfolded, Maple Ridge drifted in. one story at a time. Kids came in first, some still rubbing sleep from their eyes. Backpacks slung carelessly. They dropped into low wooden tables near the children's corner, coloring sheets and homework already scattered. A group of siblings waved shyly at her. One whispered, "My mom said you're a hero." Grace forced a smile. "Your mom is kind." The Vietnam veteran, Hank, shuffled in next. He always arrived at 8:15 sharp, settling into his worn chair with the regional newspaper folded under his arm. Today, he removed his cap and gave her a long, knowing nod. "Heard a lot of noise about you, Miss Holloway," he said. "Don't let those fools on the internet scare you. I seen what you did." A widowed grandmother named Edith came after, her plastic grocery bag rustling as she made her way to the public computer. She used it every week to email her son stationed overseas. Today, she squeezed Grace's hand and whispered, "You did the right thing. Don't ever doubt that." Grace clung to that warmth. But it didn't drown out the harsher voices swirling online. She hid in her office for a moment, shutting the door softly behind her. On the desk lay the unopened envelope from yesterday. The county's warning that the library might have to shut down by winter if funds didn't come through. They were already 3 months behind on utilities. She pressed her palms to her eyes. The timing couldn't be worse. The past always had a way of finding her. Years ago, she'd been caught in a storm of gossip at another library, false rumors that spread faster than truth. It had nearly ended her career. Maple Ridge had been her chance to begin again, quietly, humbly, and now the world was watching her again, tearing apart a single moment caught on camera. Her phone buzzed. A message from Marcus, the library's part-time assistant. "You on the news again. Channel 8. You okay?" She didn't reply. Miles away, in a compact corner office overlooking downtown Minneapolis, Sam Whitlock sat at a conference table while chaos swirled around him. His PR team argued over strategies, statements to release, ways to spin the video, how to control the narrative. A major development deal, months in the making, was up for approval tomorrow. The last thing they needed was a scandal involving a school zone. Reckless speeding, bad optics. She could sue if we're not careful. This could tank the riverfront project. The voices blended together. Sam didn't speak. He didn't even look at them. He sat with his laptop open, watching the footage again. And again. And again. Not the ending everyone shared, but the instant before the rock left Grace Holloway's hand. He zoomed in, frame by frame. Fear. Pure, unfiltered fear in her eyes. Not rage. Not ego. A woman realizing that children were in danger. A woman who didn't hesitate. Something in Sam's chest tightened, uncomfortable and unfamiliar. He closed the laptop, stood abruptly, startling the team. "We're not suing her," he said. A few jaws dropped. "Not yet," he added. "This isn't the way we handle it." "But Mr. Whitlock, she saved those kids," he snapped, sharper than intended. "And we're not blameless." Silence. He exhaled, adjusting the cuff of his tailored shirt. "We'll fix this another way." At that same moment, across town, Grace heard a sharp knock at the library's staff entrance. When she opened the door, a courier handed her a certified envelope. Her stomach dropped as she read the heading, "Whitlock Holdings. Notice to discuss damages and defamation." Her fingers went cold. The town wasn't the only thing watching now. And this story, her story, was spinning far beyond her control. The rain came in thin, slanted lines that afternoon, whispering against the tall windows of the Maple Ridge Public Library like a warning that wouldn't quite form into words. The sky hung low and heavy over the lake, and even the regulars seemed subdued. Hank sat in his usual chair but didn't open his paper. Instead, he stared at the gray light filtering through the glass. A pair of fourth graders huddled over a puzzle in the children's corner, talking in hushed voices as if someone might shush them at any moment. Grace felt the weight of the day pressing between her shoulder blades as she stepped into the small conference room at the back of the library. The town library board had called an emergency meeting, and the air already felt tight with unspoken worry. "Let's get started," said Marlene, the chairwoman, folding her hands on the table. She was a retired school counselor, normally gentle, but today her eyes flicked with concern. You've seen the video reaction. You've seen the comments. We need to talk about liability. Grace sat, her palms damp. She'd barely slept after receiving that certified envelope. Another board member, Carl, cleared his throat. Grace, we don't have insurance that covers, well. He hesitated, choosing his words with care. Rock throwing. At Millionaire's cars. A thin, humorless laugh escaped Grace. No. I imagine most policies don't. Marlene leaned forward. We're proud of you for protecting those children. Truly. But now Whitlock's attorneys are involved, and if he decides to pursue damages, the library could lose everything, Grace finished softly. Silence settled like dust. We're 3 months behind on utilities, Carl reminded. The county is already questioning our operating budget. If we lose you, Grace, we lose the backbone of this place. And without stable leadership, Marlene added, the county might decide it's simpler to close the building entirely. The words hit her harder than she expected. She knew it was bad. She didn't know it was that fragile. She pictured the low wooden tables, the kids' half-finished coloring pages, Edith's gentle hands hovering over the keyboard as she typed messages to her son overseas. Hank sitting with the morning paper like it kept him tethered to the world. If she lost her job, Maple Ridge wouldn't simply lose a librarian. It would lose a sanctuary. Some of the board members shifted uneasily. She stared at him. You think I should apologize for stopping a speeding car from hitting children? No, not for that, he said quickly. Maybe just for the word stung. Optics. As if her instinct hadn't been about protecting lives, but about performing for a camera she hadn't even known was there. Grace pressed her hands together, feeling her pulse throb against her knuckles. I won't apologize for doing what was right, but I understand the risk this puts on all of you. They fell into uneasy silence. Then the front door creaked open. Hank's voice carried down the hallway. Grace looked toward the lobby, the sound of rain fading behind the sudden hush that followed. Footsteps echoed too crisp, too deliberate to belong to anyone from town. When she stepped out of the conference room, she saw him, Sam Whitlock, standing in the middle of the library with water dripping from his coat shoulders, looking wildly out of place among sagging shelves and mismatched armchairs. His presence sucked the air from the room. The children froze. Hank's eyebrows nearly hit his hairline. He scanned the space with a guarded expression, the tension in his jaw betraying nerves he'd never admit to. The quiet warmth of the library wrapped around him like a world he didn't know how to enter. Grace swallowed hard. Mr. Whitlock? He turned toward her voice, his gaze sharp but tired. We need to talk. 2 men stepped in behind him, lawyers. Judging by their leather folders and tailored suits, that didn't quite know where to stand among library rugs patterned with fading inchworms. Grace guided them to a table tucked between tall shelves of nonfiction. She sat across from Sam, the stack of his legal papers looming like a wall. One lawyer cleared his throat. Miss Holloway, thank you for meeting with us on short notice. Grace folded her hands. Let's just get to it. The lawyer opened a folder. Our client recognizes that pursuing legal action would be publicly unwise at this time. Sam shot him a warning look, as if to say, stop talking for me. The lawyer continued anyway. Mr. Whitlock is prepared to drop all charges and cease any legal pursuit of damages. Grace blinked, surprise rippling through her. On what condition? The second lawyer slid a typed document across the table. You agree to participate in a reconciliation initiative. Joint public appearances with Mr. Whitlock, community forums, local interviews, perhaps a coordinated message about road safety and town cooperation. Grace stared at the words, heat rising in her chest. You want me to stand beside him, in front of cameras, like we're... What? Friends? Sam's voice cut in, low but steady. Not friends. Just willing to be seen in the same frame. The lawyer nodded. This will soften the narrative and help both parties. Grace's breath hitched. Both parties. as if she were the one with an image to rehabilitate. And in return, the lawyer continued, the Whitlock Foundation will provide full operational funding to the library for the next 3 years, including overdue utility bills, structural repairs, and community programming. The words landed like a blow, not painful, but heavy, almost overwhelming. 3 years of stability. 3 years of safety. Enough to keep Maple Ridge's only refuge alive. Her instinct rose sharp and clear. No. This is manipulation. This is using me. But behind her anger was a deeper truth. Without help, the library would not survive the winter. She pictured Edith's trembling hands sending emails to her son. The kids sprawled on the rug. Hank quietly reading, the way he did every morning like ritual. She looked up, her throat tight. Sam didn't flinch. This isn't about rewriting, it's about repairing. I need your help. And the library needs mine. The rain tapped steadily on the windows, a quiet metronome to her racing thoughts. Her pride wrestled with responsibility, both pulling in opposite directions. Finally, she whispered, I'll do it. The lawyers exhaled, relieved. Grace added, her voice barely above breath, but I won't lie for you. Sam's eyes softened, with something unexpected, respect, maybe, or regret. You won't have to, he said. We'll just let people see us trying. She didn't answer. And yet, she'd stepped into it anyway. The lights came first too bright, too hot, too intrusive for the quiet little meeting room tucked behind the biography section. Grace stood near the doorway, arms folded across her chest, watching as the local TV crew transformed her favorite space into something unrecognizable. Cables coiled across the carpet like snakes. Folding chairs were squeezed between tall shelves that smelled of dust and forgotten stories. A microphone boom drooped overhead, wobbling with every step a cameraman took. Sam arrived 5 minutes late. He stepped into the room, dressed in the same impeccable charcoal coat he'd worn at their tense meeting a few days earlier. But his expression was different, now tighter, as if the lights themselves were another kind of threat. His eyes scanned the setup, the wires, the crowd forming beyond the small partition. Then he found Grace. He offered a nod. This won't take long, he murmured. Grace didn't trust herself to answer without letting her irritation show, so she simply walked toward the 2 metal chairs, arranged side by side. Their names were taped to the backs in black marker, a detail that somehow made the whole thing feel even more surreal. When she sat, the metal was cold against her legs. Sam sat stiffly beside her, hands clasped as if he were facing a tribunal. Maybe he was. The room filled quickly. Parents, teachers, older residents who practically lived among these shelves. Some came curious, some came angry. Some came because Maple Ridge had never had so much as a whisper of scandal until last week. The cameras switched on with a click that felt much louder than it should have. A young local reporter stepped forward. Welcome to tonight's town conversation, she said, smiling too brightly. We're here to discuss last week's incident and what it means for our community. Grace felt her heartbeat thrum in her ears. The first few questions were gentle, directed at her. Grace, you protected our kids. Thank you. My daughter said you were brave. My daughter said you were brave. You kept that car from hitting anyone. Grace swallowed past the knot in her throat. She nodded, murmured, Thank you, feeling her cheeks warm with discomfort. Praise had never sat easily with her. Then the tone shifted. A man in a blue windbreaker stood. Mr. Whitlock, why were you speeding through a school zone? Another rose. You've bought up half our main street and doubled the rent. How much more do you plan to take from this town? A woman chimed in, sharper. Do you even know what goes on here? Do you care? Sam stiffened, shoulders locking. His eyes flicked toward the floor, then back at the crowd. He tried to answer, but the rehearsed lines tasted false even to him. Grace could see it. Everyone could. Finally, the reporter turned to Grace. Miss Holloway, you agreed to appear here today with Mr. Whitlock. Is there anything you'd like to say about the incident? Grace felt the weight of Sam's team's prepared statements sitting like stones in her pocket. She'd been told to say he'd slowed down, that he'd been distracted, that she'd acted impulsively. She didn't reach for the notes. Instead, she took a breath, letting her gaze drift across the familiar shelves. The library had always been a place where truth felt possible. "He scared us," she said quietly. I scared him right back. A soft ripple moved through the audience, half surprise, half relief. She continued, "It wasn't pretty." The room stilled. Sam turned toward her, something unguarded, flickering across his face like the faintest crack in armor that had been welded on for years. Not anger, not superiority. Something closer to humility. Or maybe the first fragile hint of understanding. For a moment, Grace felt his gaze linger, unsettled and strangely vulnerable. The reporter moved on, but the air had changed. Not much. Just enough for the room to breathe again. When the cameras finally shut off, people trickled out, murmuring among themselves. Some approached Grace to hug her. Others eyed Sam with suspicion, but not as much venom as before. The storm had eased, if only slightly. Grace escaped toward the stacks, needing the silence the way some people needed air. She walked between the tall shelves, trailing her fingers along the spines of worn books. Here, the world made sense. Stories stayed where you put them. Problems could be solved by turning a page. She didn't expect to find Sam there. He stood near the genealogy section, head bent toward a bronze dedication plaque on the wall. The dim light overhead cast shadows through his hair, softening his usually sharp silhouette. Grace slowed. "Most people leave right after these things," she said quietly. He didn't look at her. "Most people don't see this." She stepped closer, reading the plaque. The Margaret Whitlock Memorial Fund, dedicated to expanding literacy and community education. In loving memory of Margaret Ann Whitlock, 1959, 2018. Grace felt her breath catch. "Your wife?" Sam nodded once, jaw tightening. Grace stared at the plaque, tracing the engraved letters with her eyes. She imagined a woman with soft hands and ink-smudged fingers, someone who loved stories, someone who maybe once believed libraries could save people. And this place, her place, had been touched by that woman before Grace ever arrived. "That's why the name sounded familiar," Grace whispered. "I thought it was just a coincidence." Sam finally looked at her. "I haven't stepped inside here since she died," he said softly. "Not until today." Rain tapped gently against the windows, and for the first time since the Ferrari incident, Grace didn't know what to say. Somewhere between the stacks and the shadows, something shifted. Not forgiveness, not trust, but the smallest beginning of understanding, a beginning neither of them had expected. It was one of those afternoons when the world felt wrapped in cotton, quiet, dim, with a kind of softness that made even the library lights seem muted. Grace was reshelving picture books when she heard the front door open. The bell gave a reluctant little ring, the kind it saved for rainy days. She turned, half expecting a child, trailing Mud or Edith looking for help with the computer again. Instead, Sam stood just inside the doorway. No cameras, no reporters, no suit. Just Sam, wearing an old, worn jacket that looked like it had been folded in the back of a closet for years. His hair was damp from the mist outside. He hovered near the return desk, almost as if stepping farther in required permission. Grace straightened. "You're early for the next scheduled thing," she said. Her tone was neutral, but her pulse flickered with surprise. "No scheduled thing today," he replied quietly. "I just wanted to see the place again." She nodded slowly, then motioned toward the rows of shelves. "Walk with me." He followed her through the quiet aisles, his footsteps hesitant. The library felt different with him there, more fragile somehow, like it was holding its breath. Grace stopped at the children's corner. The tiny wooden chairs were arranged in a half-circle, their paint chipped from decades of small hands. A stack of picture books leaned against the wall. A plush bear with one eye missing sat propped on a beanbag chair, waiting for the next child to hug it. "These corners," Grace said softly, "they hold the memories of every kid who's ever come through here." Sam crouched slightly, his fingertips brushing the edge of a miniature table. She used to talk about spaces like this, he murmured. Margaret? He nodded. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable, just heavy. Outside, a sudden crack of thunder shook the air. It rolled across the lake and hit the library roof with a deep rumble that made the windows tremble. Then came the rain, fast, hard, loud. The downpour drummed against the roof like 1,000 frantic fists. Sam froze. At first, Grace thought he was simply startled, but then she saw his knuckles whiten as he gripped the nearest bookshelf. His chest tightened, breath shallow, his eyes fixed on some point far away, glassy and unseeing. Sam? Grace stepped closer. Hey. Sit. Here. He didn't move. The rain pounded harder, the rhythm brutal, relentless. Grace guided him gently toward a chair in the corner. His breath shook as he lowered himself, elbows braced on his knees. It's the sound, he managed. The rain, on the roof. I wasn't expecting. Grace pulled another chair close, sitting across from him. She didn't touch him, but she stayed close enough that he could anchor himself to her presence. He inhaled sharply, eyes closing as though steadying a pain that had waited years for release. When we... His voice broke, and he swallowed hard before starting again. We were driving back from dinner. It was one of those stupid, petty arguments you can't even remember the start of. I said something. She said something. Nothing worth losing everything over. The rain filled the silence between his words. She asked me to pull over, said she'd walk the last mile to the library. She loved this place. His voice trembled. She said it calmed her, made her feel useful, grounded. I let her out anyway. Grace's throat tightened. She didn't look back, Sam whispered. She just walked, straight toward this very building. He drew in a shaky breath. And 2 blocks from here. A drunk driver ran the red light. The words fell into the space between them like broken glass. Grace felt her heart constrict, not in judgment, but in a sudden, powerful empathy. She had suspected pain behind his anger, but not this, never this. Sam rubbed a hand over his face. I got the call at the hospital. I didn't even make it here in time. By the time I arrived, she was already gone. Thunder boomed again, and he flinched. That's why you hate that stretch of road, Grace murmured. Why the crosswalk rattled you so much. He nodded faintly. Every time I go near it, I feel like I'm back in that moment. Losing control, failing her all over again. Grace's gaze softened. You aren't responsible for what that driver did. I'm responsible for letting her walk away, he said, voice cracking. I'm responsible for being the last thing she argued with. Grace's chest ached for him. Grief lies, she said quietly. It tells you you're the villain. In stories where you were simply human. For a moment, the only sound was the rain hammering the roof. Softer now, almost rhythmic. Grace leaned forward, lowering her voice as if the library itself needed gentleness. Sam, maybe this is where you're supposed to stop running. He looked up, something raw and unshielded in his expression. For the first time since she'd thrown that rock, she saw the man beneath the expensive coat and sharp words, the man carrying a grief that had shaped every angry edge of him. His eyes filled, not with rage, but with tears. He didn't try to blink away. He didn't hide them. He didn't apologize for them. He just let them fall. Grace didn't move closer. She didn't need to. Sometimes stillness was its own form of comfort. Outside, the rain softened to a patter. Inside, something opened quiet and unexpected between 2 people who had collided in the worst way and were now learning the truth hidden beneath the wreckage. The shadows among the shelves felt different now. Not darker. Deeper. By Tuesday morning, the cold had settled over Maple Ridge, like a warning. Frost clung to the grass outside the library, glittering under the pale sun, and Grace clutched her thermos close as she unlocked the front door. When she stepped inside, she immediately felt it. The air was too still, too cold, too sharp. She flicked on the lights, her breath faintly visible for a moment. Not good. A thin yellow envelope lay on the circulation desk, stamped with red letters she'd learned to dread. Final notice. Heating service shut off. Grace closed her eyes, pressing her fingers to her temples. They were already behind on so much. Even with Sam's foundation covering operations for the next few years, the arrangement didn't include emergency repairs or overdue bills from before the contract. The library's ancient boiler had been dying for years, groaning louder every winter. If it failed now, with early November already biting at the windows, the library would have to close until repairs could be funded, and the county might not reopen it. She folded the notice and tucked it beneath a stack of returned books, as if burying it might buy more time. A few hours later, the building filled with its usual rhythm, children tumbling in after school. Edith tapping at the computer keys, Hank humming under his breath as he flipped through the paper. Grace tried to keep the worry from creeping into her smile, but the boiler made it impossible to hide. Every few minutes, a metallic clang echoed from the basement, followed by a low groan that vibrated through the floorboards. By late afternoon, even the kids noticed. "Miss Grace," a girl whispered, "is there a monster downstairs?" Grace mustered a reassuring grin. "Just an old heater that's cranky." She hoped she wasn't lying. She slipped away to the stairwell, listening to the sputtering below like a doctor listening to a failing heartbeat. She considered calling 3 different heating repair companies, then remembered the cost and shoved her phone back in her pocket. They couldn't afford the visit, let alone the fix. Then she heard footsteps behind her. Sam. He leaned against the doorway, wearing a navy flannel shirt instead of his usual button-down. He looked around, brow furrowing as another clang rattled the pipes. "Is that the boiler?" he asked. Grace hesitated. "Yes, it's old. Very old." Another sputter. "Smoke?" "No. Just dust." But the smell was worsening. "Have you had it serviced?" he asked gently. "We can't afford a technician," she admitted quietly. "Not on top of the gas bill and the overdue notices." Sam absorbed that without judgment, but his jaw tightened, not with anger at her, but at the situation. Without a word, he started down the stairs. "Sam, you don't have to." But he kept going. Grace hurried after him. The boiler room was cramped and low-ceilinged, smelling of burnt dust and rust. Pipes snaked overhead, dripping occasionally into old metal buckets. Sam stood in the center of the room, taking everything in like someone reading an old map. "I used to fix these," he murmured. Grace blinked. "You?" "My dad ran construction crews before I ever dreamed of real estate. I spent half of high school summers in basements just like this." He shrugged out of his flannel shirt, rolling up the sleeves of the t-shirt beneath. That's when Grace saw them, thin, faded scars crossing his forearms, old burns, old cuts. A reminder that he hadn't always been the man with the Ferrari. A local handyman, Walt, arrived moments later, after Grace called down from the stairwell. He was in his 70s but still strong as an oak trunk. "This thing's a relic," he muttered, kneeling beside Sam. Sam smiled faintly. "I'm already here." For the next 2 hours, Grace drifted in and out of the room, bringing coffee in mismatched mugs, watching from the doorway as they wrestled with stubborn bolts and seized valves. Sam's hair grew damp with sweat. Walt grumbled at the boiler like it was an unruly mule. Dust floated through the air like tiny ghosts. Kids leaned over the top of the stairwell to watch. "Is he fixing it?" one asked. "He's trying," Grace said. Sam wiped grease on his jeans, expensive jeans he didn't seem to care about ruining. He diagnosed a clogged fuel line, a stuck pressure valve, a cracked ignition plate. He worked with a strange mix of frustration and familiarity, as if the machine were reminding him of another life. Once, he caught Grace watching him. Something passed between them, wordless, warm, and complicated. Finally, just after sunset, Walt banged a wrench against the metal casing. "Try it now." Sam hit the reset switch. The boiler sputtered violently, coughed, clanked, and then roared to life with a steady, thundering hum. Heat flowed through the vents upstairs. A warm breeze drifted up the stairwell. The library seemed to exhale all at once, books, chairs, walls, everything. The children cheered. Edith clapped her hands. Hank raised his newspaper like a victory flag. Grace laughed, relief filling her chest so suddenly it almost hurt. Sam leaned against the wall, chest rising and falling with exhaustion. But before Grace could thank him, a tiny whirlwind barreled down the stairs. It was Liam, 6 years old, cheeks smudged with marker from the craft table. He ran straight to Sam, grabbed him around the waist, and squeezed with all the strength his small body could muster. "Thank you for saving our library." Sam froze. Completely, utterly froze. He looked down at the little boy, eyes wide, breath caught. For a second, Grace wondered if he would pull away, if he even remembered how to accept affection freely given. Then, very slowly, Sam lowered a hand and placed it on the boy's back. A gentle pat. Then a real embrace. Something fragile and unfamiliar flickered across his face. Grace felt her throat tighten, watching him relearn a language he had long forgotten, kindness without expectation, gratitude without performance. When Liam finally let go and scampered back upstairs, Sam remained still, staring at the doorway as if the moment had changed something inside him. Grace stepped closer, but not too close. "Thank you," she said softly. He didn't look at her, but she saw the slightest curve at the corner of his mouth. A smile trying to find its way back into the world. And failing, gently, beautifully. The church hall hadn't changed in decades. Its wood-paneled walls still carried the faint scent of lemon polish and potluck dinners going back 3 generations. On Saturday evening, the place buzzed with neighbors balancing casserole dishes and foil-covered pies. The tables lined with patchwork tablecloths someone had stitched in the 80s. Hand-painted signs hung from twine near the stage. "Keep Maple Ridge reading," and "Support our library." Grace stood near the entrance, watching as families trickled in. Kids tugged at their parents' sleeves, pointing to the dessert table like it held treasure. The older folks claimed their usual folding chairs, settling in as if this were a reunion rather than a fundraiser. In a way, maybe it was both. Her stomach tightened with nerves. She wasn't used to being the center of anything, certainly not a community event where hundreds of eyes might turn toward her. But tonight wasn't about fame or attention. Tonight was about survival, hope, and unexpectedly about Sam. He arrived quietly, slipping through the side door, wearing a soft gray sweater instead of his usual crisp dress shirt. The fabric hugged his shoulders in a way that made him look almost approachable. He hesitated near the dessert table, staring at a row of homemade pies as if they were foreign objects. Grace stepped up beside him, still deciding between the cherry or the blueberry. He looked at her, a flicker of warmth in his eyes. "I've never seen so many casseroles in one room." "That's Minnesota," she said with a half-laugh. "We solve everything with a baking dish." "Well," he murmured, "if the food tastes half as good as it smells, I may survive this evening." Grace nudged him slightly. "Just don't insult anyone's family recipe. We don't have the budget to repair bruised egos." He smiled, an unguarded one this time. Duly noted. People glanced at them as they moved through the hall. Not with hostility, but with curiosity, calculation, maybe even hope. It made Grace feel suddenly exposed. The hand-painted banner on stage announced her upcoming introduction of Sam, and that knowledge pressed on her like a weight. Marlene tapped her shoulder. "You're on in 2 minutes," she whispered. Grace swallowed hard. She stepped up onto the small wooden platform, heart pounding in her ears. The microphone crackled, drawing everyone's attention. "Good evening," she began, her voice softer than she intended. "Thank you all for being here. This isn't just a fundraiser, it's a reminder of how much this town values its stories, its people, and the place where those stories meet." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Grace took a breath. "I'd like to introduce someone who's become our partner in keeping Maple Ridge reading." The words caught, snagging on her tongue. The word partner felt too big, too early. She forced herself onward. "Please welcome Samuel Whitlock." Sam stepped forward to gentle applause. Up close, he looked almost shy. Not nervous, he was too practiced for that, but unsure in a way that softened the edges of him. He approached the microphone with a small stack of note cards. Grace recognized the crisp, rehearsed lines, his PR team's handiwork. But after glancing at the cards, Sam slid them into his pocket. I'm not great at these things, he admitted. A ripple of laughter moved through the hall. I came prepared with a speech about economic investment and community partnerships. But that's not what tonight is about. He paused, his gaze drifting toward the children's table where Liam waved enthusiastically. My wife, Margaret, used to say libraries were the lungs of a town. They keep people breathing. I thought I could honor her with money. Turns out, his voice softened. It takes time. And listening. And showing up, even when it's uncomfortable. The room grew still. He nodded toward Grace. She scared me into showing up. And I'm grateful for it. Grace felt her chest tighten not painfully, but with an unfamiliar warmth. Sam stepped back, and the crowd applauded louder this time. Not politely, but genuinely. For the first time, Grace saw the town beginning to shift around him just slightly. Just enough. Later, people drifted outside where volunteers had strung up fairy lights between maple trees. The warm glow softened the night air, turning the gravel behind the church into something almost magical. Someone connected an old speaker to a dusty extension cord, and slow, familiar music began to hum through the yard. Grace was hanging another strand of lights when she felt someone stop beside her. You didn't have to say I was your partner, Sam said quietly. But I didn't hate hearing it. Grace laughed softly. It felt strange coming out of my mouth. Well, he said, I won't hold it against you. They stood in easy silence as the lights flickered to life. Grace could feel the space narrowing between them, not physically, but in that intangible way. Two people slowly leaned toward each other. She handed him the end of the light string. Your speech was honest. I didn't plan it, he admitted. I just realized I wanted to say something real. And did it feel strange, being real? He exhaled a faint, amused breath. Stranger than casseroles, but less terrifying. Grace smiled, and something flickered in his eyes, something warm, cautious, wanting. Behind them, the older couple who ran the church rummaged through a box of CDs. Suddenly, a slow melody poured from the speaker. Couples began drifting together under the trees, moving in gentle circles. Sam glanced around, visibly uncomfortable. I don't dance. That makes two of us, Grace replied. But then Evelyn Peterson, the town's unofficial grandmother, shooed them forward with both hands. Go on. You two. Don't let youth have all the fun. Grace felt heat rush up her neck. Sam offered a tentative hand. For appearance's sake? His tone tried to sound casual, but the question carried a tremor of something else, an invitation neither of them understood yet. Grace placed her hand in his, and they stepped beneath the maple trees. His touch was steady but careful. They swayed awkwardly at first, stepping on each other's toes, bumping shoulders. Grace let out an embarrassed laugh. Sam did too. Someone whispered something teasing from the sidelines. And the two of them, caught between irritation and amusement, looked at each other. Their eyes met, not by accident, not for show, but in a quiet moment when their defenses slipped and the world narrowed to the small space between them. They didn't kiss. They didn't need to. The moment itself said enough. This isn't just a deal anymore. The music swelled around them, and for a breath or two, Grace felt almost weightless. When the song ended, they stepped apart slowly, reluctantly. The night air felt different, alive, charged, uncertain. Grace looked away first, her heart flickering like the lights overhead, and Sam just watched her, as if something in him had shifted again. And he wasn't sure how to shift back. Grace had just settled into bed when her phone buzzed once, then again, then continuously, as if someone were shaking it awake. She reached for it in the dark, blinking the sleep from her eyes. 6 new messages, 12 missed notifications. Group chat, urgent. Her pulse quickened. The first text came from Marlene. Grace, call me as soon as possible. It's about the contract. Then, from Edith, written in shaky caps. The internet is saying terrible things about you. And then, a link. Grace clicked. A regional news site had posted screenshots of her signed agreement with Sam. Not the public summary. Not the talking points. The whole thing. Black and white paragraphs outlining her public appearances with him. The funding schedule. The stipulation that she help soften community sentiment regarding Mr. Whitlock. The headline screamed across the screen. Small-town librarian in secret PR deal with millionaire hero act used to gain funding. Grace's mouth went dry. Another headline below it. Did she sell out her community? Did she sell out her community? Her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped the phone. Notifications flooded in. Comments. Hundreds of them. So, she got paid to scold him? Figures. Using the kids as leverage is disgusting. Always knew something was off about that story. The rich get away with murder because people like her take the hush money. Grace's vision blurred. She forced herself to breathe, but the air felt thick, heavy, wrong. How had the contract gotten out? Only a handful of people had ever seen it. Her stomach twisted. It didn't matter how. What mattered was that the truth had been torn apart and reassembled into something ugly, monstrous, and she was the face on it. Another text buzzed. Parents are calling for a meeting. 9 a.m. tomorrow. Marlene. Grace curled forward, pressing a hand to her forehead. She had done this for the library. For the kids. For the people who had no place else to go when winter closed in or when home didn't feel safe. Now the world thought she'd put a price tag on them. She didn't sleep. She barely blinked. When dawn crept over Maple Ridge, the library parking lot was already filling with cars. Grace walked toward the building, with her scarf pulled tight against the cold. Parents huddled in small clusters near the entrance. Some looked at her. Some looked away so fast it stung more than their stares would have. Inside, the meeting room felt overfull, crowded with worried faces. The board sat at the front table, papers spread before them like evidence. Marlene rose first, her expression gentle but exhausted. Grace. Thank you for coming. Grace sat. Her hands refused to stay still. We need to discuss what's come to light, Marlene said carefully. The community deserves clarity. Of course, Grace whispered. Another board member, Carl, adjusted his glasses. We've seen the contract. We understand the funding pressures. But the public is asking, did you enter into this arrangement knowing it would benefit Mr. Whitlock's reputation? Grace swallowed, throat tight. I didn't think about his reputation. I was thinking about our heating bills. A parent stood abruptly. Grace felt the words hit like stones. Because I was ashamed. Because it felt complicated. And because I knew it would look terrible, even though I did it to save this library. Another voice rose. You let him use you, and you let our kids be part of the show. Grace shook her head. No, I would never. But the room was buzzing now, voices overlapping, fear turning sharp. Grace saw Liam's mother, eyes red. She saw Hank in the back row, arms crossed, face unreadable. She saw Edith wringing her hands in her lap. Marlene tapped the table to quiet everyone. Let her finish. Raumar, 1T, to the place. Grace's voice trembled. I didn't want to lie. I didn't want to deceive anyone. I just wanted to keep this place alive. Silence swept the room for a moment. Grace dared to hope. Then Marlene inhaled, her shoulders heavy with the weight of decision. Grace, until we sort this out, we have to place you on administrative leave. The words landed like a blow to the chest. No, Edith whispered from the back. But it was too soft, lost in the hush. Grace sat perfectly still, the air closing in, the walls shrinking. Marlene's eyes glistened. I'm so sorry. Grace nodded, unable to speak. She rose on unsteady feet and walked toward the door. Parents stepped aside, not rudely, but cautiously, like she carried something contagious. Outside, the cold bit hard, wind scraping tears from her cheeks. Just days ago, these same people hugged her. Just days ago, she'd been called brave. Now they avoided her eyes, whispering behind gloved hands. Grace walked down the library steps, each one heavier than the last. She'd saved their children once, but she couldn't save herself from this. Sam had seen scandals before. He'd survived business disputes, bad press, union complaints, political storms, and online mobs that swarmed like locusts. His PR team had always handled it for him, smoothing over the mess with carefully chosen words and money in the right places. But this was different. The contract leak hit the internet like a lightning strike. Within an hour, the narrative had twisted into something grotesque. His name was dragged, yes, but Grace's was dragged harder. By midnight, Sam sat alone in his penthouse kitchen, staring at the glow of his phone screen. Comment after comment called her manipulative, selfish, a sellout. The same people who'd praised her bravery a week ago now typed with venom. His team's group chat pinged nonstop. Stay silent. We'll release a statement in the morning. Do not appear with her. Distance yourself. This is a fire we can't win. Sam set the phone face down on the granite countertop. The city lights shimmered beyond the glass wall, a glittering skyline he had once taken pride in. Tonight it looked cold. Indifferent, he exhaled and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Grace's face floated into his mind, the look she'd worn the day she told him she wouldn't lie for him. The trembling resilience in her voice when she said she did everything for the kids. The way she'd looked last night at the potluck fundraiser, swaying under the maple trees, as if letting herself hope for the first time in years. And now, they'd humiliated her publicly, suspended her, turned her into a villain for doing something brave and impossible. A slow, gathering anger tightened in Sam's chest. Not the explosive anger he'd lived on for years, but a deep, steady anger born of clarity. His team wanted silence, but silence had already taken enough from him. Silence had killed Margaret piece by piece after the accident, his refusal to talk, to open up, to admit his guilt and grief. Silence had driven him into a world where money solved everything except the things that mattered. He wasn't going to let silence take Grace too. He grabbed his keys. The TV studio smelled of dust and coffee, busy people in headsets rushing past him, adjusting lights, tapping microphones, muttering countdowns. A live broadcast always felt like stepping onto thin ice. No edits, no rehearsals, no protection. His PR manager trailed behind him in panic. Sam, please, this is reckless. Let us draft the statement. No. You're too emotional for this. Good. This could tank the downtown project. Shareholders will panic. I'm aware. Then why are you doing this? Sam looked at her, eyes flat with determination. Because I'm done hiding behind you. The manager fell silent. He stepped into the small set where a single desk, 2 chairs, and glaring studio lights waited. The anchor, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, greeted him with a firm handshake. She had the look of someone who'd seen every kind of story walk through her doors. Mr. Whitlock, she said, thank you for agreeing to speak live. I insisted, he replied. The cameras rolled. A red light blinked on. The anchor turned toward the viewer. Tonight we're joined by Samuel Whitlock, following the leaked contract between his foundation and local librarian Grace Holloway. Mr. Whitlock, thank you for being here. Sam nodded. His pulse thudded in his ears, but his voice came steady. Thank you for having me. Let's begin. The anchor's tone sharpened. Did you pay Miss Holloway to improve your image? Sam didn't hesitate. Yes. A ripple of surprise passed across the staff watching behind the camera. But not the way people think, Sam continued. I was driving too fast. I was careless. I frightened a group of children. Grace reacted to save them, and she threw a rock to stop me. That part wasn't staged. That was her doing the right thing. And the PR arrangement? The anchor pressed. Sam exhaled slowly. That was my doing, not hers. My team offered her a deal that would soften the backlash against me. She agreed because her library was weeks from shutting down. She never once asked for money for herself. Not $1. Every cent went to the library. The anchor leaned forward. Some people say she sold out. Sam's jaw tightened. They're wrong. His voice grew stronger. Grace Holloway is the only person in this entire story who acted without selfishness. She protected children. She protected a community resource. Meanwhile, he paused, swallowed. I was hiding behind money. Again. And what about the accident with your wife? The anchor asked gently. You referenced it earlier when you spoke to our producer. Sam inhaled shakily. The studio lights blurred for a moment. Margaret was on her way to that library the night she died. She loved libraries. She loved helping people. I never honored her the right way. I buried myself in work and silence instead of grief. And when Grace confronted me, it forced me to face what I'd been running from. The anchor hesitated, then asked the hardest question. Do you blame Grace for how the town sees you now? Sam met the camera head-on. No, he said, voice unwavering. If you need someone to blame, blame me. Not the woman who threw a rock to save your children. The studio went utterly still. Sam leaned forward, resting his hands on the table. I'm not asking anyone to forgive me. I'm asking them to see Grace for who she is, a person who put others first when I didn't. A person who shouldn't lose her job because I made a deal she felt cornered into accepting. The anchor seemed momentarily speechless. The producer behind the camera gave a stunned thumbs up. The red light went off. But the impact had only just begun. Within minutes, the clip hit the internet. Within an hour, it spread to every local and regional outlet. By dawn, it was everywhere. Sam Whitlock, stoic, untouchable, famously private, had just torn open his chest on live TV. And the world felt it. Grace would see it soon. But the consequences for both of them were only beginning. The boardroom at Whitlock Development resembled a courtroom more than a place of business. Mahogany paneled the walls, polished to a shine that reflected the city lights pouring through tall windows. The long table, sleek, cold, impossibly expensive, held a dozen leather chairs that creaked with shifting bodies. Sam took his seat at the head of the table. The air was icy, even though the heating hummed softly. His uncle, Robert Whitlock, sat to his left, jaw tight, eyes sharp with the kind of anger that didn't require volume to carry power. The meeting hadn't started, but the storm already had. The general counsel cleared her throat. Mr. Whitlock, your interview last night has created complications. Robert leaned forward. Complications? He admitted fault on live television. Exposed us to liability. Invited lawsuits. Humiliated the company. Sam folded his hands atop the table. I told the truth. Robert's voice stayed calm, too calm. You told a story, Samuel. Other board members murmured in agreement. Sam looked around the table. Some avoided his gaze. Some stared with thinly veiled frustration. Only one man, Mr. Caldwell, the oldest board member, watched quietly, unreadable beneath pale brows. The CFO tapped a tablet. We've already received inquiries from the City Council about the Maple Ridge project. They want assurances. They want oversight. She paused. They want proof we're not exploiting communities. Sam inhaled. Then give it to them. A ripple of confusion moved through the room. Robert scoffed. We're not converting this company into a charity. I'm not suggesting charity. Sam replied steadily. I'm suggesting investment. In libraries? Robert spat. In communities, Sam corrected. The lights overhead hummed faintly, filling the silence. He stood, walking toward the large screen behind him. I want to show you something. A set of graphs appeared, public sentiment metrics climbing sharply after his interview. Social engagement numbers, increased confidence in projects that showed community involvement. Our approval ratings, Sam said, jumped 30% overnight. One board member leaned forward. Temporarily. Maybe. Sam agreed. But it shows something important. People want us to be human, not just profitable. Robert slapped the table. They want us to stay out of trouble, and you walked straight into it. Sam turned to face them fully. I've spent years pretending that keeping quiet was the safest move. That silence protected us. It didn't. It just made us colder, more disconnected. And people don't trust companies that act like machines. Several board members shifted uncomfortably. Sam continued. We build buildings, skyscrapers, apartment complexes, shopping centers. But we don't build spaces that help people live. Libraries, parks, after-school programs, those are what make a community real. Those are what keep families rooted and neighborhoods thriving. Robert glared. It's not nonsense, Sam cut in, his voice firmer than they'd ever heard it. It's a business strategy. Strong communities strengthen our developments. Safer neighborhoods attract tenants. Engaged residents increase property value. We need to invest in the places where we plant our projects. Or we won't have customers left to sell to. Silence again, this time not tense, but thoughtful. Sam clicked to the next slide. His proposed initiative, Whitlock Community Partnership Clause. For every major development, the company commits to funding a public space library wing, park renovation, after-school center, or community project proportional to profit margins. A murmur rose. That's insane. We'll lose millions. This will set a precedent. Our shareholders will revolt. Sam let them talk. Then, gentlemen, ladies. He leaned on the table, hands flat, voice steady. If we want the future of Whitlock development to be more than steel and glass, then we need to build something with a soul. Robert shot to his feet. This is emotional self-sabotage born from some small-town drama. We should vote to remove him as CEO immediately. The room froze. A woman near the center of the table raised a brow. Robert. No, Robert snapped. He's lost control. We all see it. He looked around, expecting immediate agreement. But the room was less united than he believed. The general counsel whispered. We should hear him out. The CFO frowned down at the data. Some of these projections are surprisingly strong. Robert bristled. You're fools if you think sentiment outweighs profit. Sam straightened. I'm not replacing profit. I'm reinforcing it, Robert sneered. You're just trying to impress that librarian. Sam's voice sliced through the room. Leave her out of this. Leave her out of this. A charged pause followed. Robert smirked. Touchy. Sam ignored the bait. Call the vote. The corporate secretary nodded, pulling out the electronic voting system. All in favor of adopting Mr. Whitlock's Community Partnership Initiative, select yes. Opposed, no. Board members hesitated. Fingers hovered over buttons, eyes darted. One by one, no, no, yes, no, yes, yes. The tally tightened. It came down to Mr. Caldwell, the older, quiet man who hadn't spoken all morning. He looked tired, but there was a steadiness in his gaze. Slowly, he removed his glasses, polishing them with the corner of a handkerchief. When he finally looked at Sam, his pale blue eyes held something unexpected memory. I grew up in a steel town, Caldwell said softly. We didn't have much. My mother worked 2 jobs. The library was the only place that stayed warm in winter. I did my homework there. I learned who I wanted to be there. He pressed the yes button. The screen flashed. 6-5. Motion passed. Robert's face drained of color. Sam exhaled slowly, relief, gratitude, responsibility, all settling into his shoulders at once. Caldwell nodded toward him. Build something worth remembering, son. Sam took his seat, heart pounding. He still had his job, but now he had something far more daunting, his own promise. And somewhere, a woman who didn't know that everything he'd just done was for her too. Grace Holloway had always lived simply. A small studio apartment above the bakery on Main Street, a creaky staircase that groaned underfoot, windows that fogged in winter and let in too much sunlight in summer. She'd made peace with all of it years ago. The imperfection felt familiar, honest. But now, with the library closed to her, the apartment seemed smaller than it had ever been. Cardboard boxes were stacked everywhere, some old, some new, all dusty. Books she'd meant to donate last spring, old lesson plans, flyers from past summer reading programs, small artifacts of a life lived in service of a place she wasn't sure she was welcome in anymore. For the first time since she was a teenager, she caught herself thinking about leaving Minnesota entirely. Disappear. Start over. Find a quiet town where nobody had seen the video, nobody whispered behind their hands, nobody looked at her with disappointment or suspicion. A place where being a librarian didn't come with a scandal attached to it. The thought was strangely comforting and terrifying. On the second day of her leave, she sat on the floor, surrounded by those boxes, holding a stack of photographs. She hadn't looked through them in years. Here was her, with the first group of kids she ever read to tiny faces. Missing teeth. Holding picture books like treasure. Here was a thank you card from a girl named Monica, who'd once spent afternoons hiding in the library because home wasn't safe. The card had smudged ink from a tear the girl tried to hide the day she handed it over. Thank you for making a place where I feel okay. Grace held the card to her chest, her breath tightening. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. She didn't have to check it to know who it was. Sam had texted every day since the suspension, and every day she'd stared at the messages without answering. Some were short, "Are you okay? Please talk to me. I'm sorry for everything." Some were longer, awkward, painfully honest attempts to reach her. She'd read each one, then put the phone down. On the third day, there was a knock at the door. She knew that knock. Not rushed, not hesitant. She opened the door just enough to see the face of Mr. Alden, the Vietnam veteran who came into the library every morning at 8:15 sharp. He stood with a folded newspaper tucked under one arm. His posture was straight as ever, though age bent his shoulders ever so slightly. His eyes, blue and steady, held no judgment. "Afternoon, Miss Holloway," he said quietly. She blinked back the instinct to apologize, to hide. "Hi. Mr. Alden." He held out the newspaper. "Figured you ought to see this." Grace took it, confused. I'm not sure I can handle more bad headlines today." "Not a headline," he said. "A transcript." She unfolded it. The print was small, but unmistakable. Sam's interview. Every word he'd spoken about her, about the library, about Margaret, about blame. The page trembled between her fingers. Mr. Alden watched her expression change: fear, disbelief, then something softer, almost painful. "He said all that on live TV?" she whispered. "He did," the old veteran replied. "And folks like him don't say things like that unless they mean 'em." She swallowed hard. "It doesn't matter now. The damage is done." Mr. Alden frowned. Not unkindly, just with the clarity of someone who had lived long enough to spot when someone young was making a mistake. "Now listen here," he said, leaning on his cane. "People talk. Always have, always will. But you," he tapped the newspaper in her hands, "you're not the kind who quits just because it got ugly." Grace's throat tightened. "Maybe I'm tired of fighting." "Everyone gets tired," he said simply. "But tired ain't the same as done." She set the newspaper on the counter, staring at the printed words again. His vulnerability. His refusal to throw her under the bus. Even when it would have been easier for him. Her voice shook. "The board is voting again tomorrow. They'll decide if I can return or if I need to pack up these boxes for good." "And where will you be when they vote?" he asked. Grace looked at the boxes. At the photos. At the card from Monica. At everything she'd built in that town. "I don't know." "Yes, you do." His tone was gentle but firm. "You show up. You stand there and let them see the whole of you, not the headlines. Not the fear. Just you." Grace blinked, tears brimming. "I suppose." She took a deep breath. "I suppose I should be there to hear it." Mr. Alden nodded once, satisfied. "That's the librarian I know." He started down the stairs but paused after 2 steps. "And Miss Holloway?" "Yes? Maple Ridge ain't Maple Ridge without you." She closed the door softly after he left, leaning her forehead against the wood, breathing in unsteady gulps. Outside, the bakery sign flickered on. The evening crowd began to gather. Life went on around her, indifferent and familiar. Grace stepped back, wiped her eyes, and looked at the boxes. Maybe she'd keep them empty a little while longer, just in case. The night stretched quiet around her, heavy with possibilities she wasn't ready to name. But morning was coming, and she would face it. The Maple Ridge Community Center never felt more crowded than it did that morning. Folding chairs lined the narrow hall, winter coats draped over their backs, the low murmur of anxious voices filling every corner. Snow from early November clung to boots as people shuffled inside, shaking the chill from their shoulders. Grace stood just outside the doorway, her palms damp, her heart pounding like she was back in middle school, waiting for her name to be called at a spelling bee she hadn't studied for. She hadn't slept much. She'd told herself she was ready, but readiness didn't stop the fear. The board had called this meeting a continuation, but it felt like a verdict. Inside, she saw familiar faces, parents she'd worked with for years, kids she'd tutored through teary-eyed math assignments, seniors who had spent countless afternoons in the reading chairs by the window, all people she cared about more than she could ever say. Some saw her and gave small nods, others looked away. Both stung. Grace took her seat near the side wall, her coat folded neatly on her lap. She didn't want to take up too much space. Didn't want to seem presumptuous. Didn't want to presume she belonged. The board president cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming." A woman stood, a mother whose son had been in the crosswalk the day Grace threw the rock. Her voice trembled. "I said things I shouldn't have," she began. "I was scared. And when people are scared, they lash out. But Miss Holloway has always put our kids first. Mine, yours, all of them." She swallowed hard. "I'm sorry. My son misses her reading hour." Grace pressed her lips together, fighting tears. A few more parents spoke. Some cautiously. Some loudly supportive. A few remained hesitant, voicing concerns about transparency, about trust. But even their tone carried less venom than before, more uncertainty than anger. Then an unexpected silence fell, because someone was standing. In the very back row, Sam Whitlock. He wasn't dressed like a CEO today. No suit. Just a navy sweater, worn jeans, a long coat streaked with road salt from the drive. He'd taken off his gloves and held them awkwardly in his hands like he didn't know what to do with them. He stepped forward, one deliberate pace. "I'm not here as a businessman," he began, his voice steady but quiet. "Or as the man in the Ferrari. I'm here as someone who grew up in this town." Heads turned. Grace's breath caught. "I used to sit in that library," he continued, nodding toward the building across the snowy street. "Over there in the children's room. I was a lonely kid. Books were the only place that made sense for a while." Several older townspeople exchanged surprised glances. They remembered the Whitlock family. But not like this. Sam's shoulders rose and fell with a deep breath. "I failed this town once," he said. "And I nearly failed it again. The contract I offered, Grace put her in a terrible position. That responsibility is mine, not hers." His voice thickened. "And I'm sorry." A wave of murmurs crossed the room. Sam cleared his throat, steadying himself. "Whether I stay, CEO or not, whether people like me or not, I want to do something that lasts. Something that honors someone I loved, and this town that raised me." He reached into his coat and placed a thin folder on the board's table. "In that folder is a signed endowment agreement. My company and I will fully fund the Maple Ridge Library's maintenance, staffing, and programming permanently. No conditions, no contracts. Not tied to any deal or any person. It belongs to the town. It stays open for good." Gasps. A stifled cheer, a few tears. Grace felt the air leave her lungs in a long, shaky breath. One of the board members blinked at the documents, stunned. "Mr. Whitlock, this is substantial." "It's overdue," Sam replied. He didn't look at Grace yet. Maybe afraid to. Maybe trying to give her space. The board president cleared his throat again. "Thank you, Mr. Whitlock. We appreciate your statement. We'll now move to the reinstatement vote." Grace closed her eyes. The scraping of chairs. Papers shuffling. A low murmur of motion. Then, all in favor of reinstating Grace Holloway as head librarian. Hands rose. All of them. Every single one. Motion passes unanimously. Applause started hesitantly, then grew, rolling through the room until even those who doubted her clapped along. Grace's cheeks burned with relief, disbelief, joy. She didn't realize she was crying until a teardrop fell into her hands. The meeting dispersed slowly, people coming up to hug her, shake her hand, offer apologies, offer casseroles. She absorbed each interaction like a patch sewn over a rip in her chest. When the crowd thinned, Grace slipped across the street toward the library. Snowflakes drifted lazily around her. The air smelled like chimney smoke and hope. Inside, the children's room was dim except for a lamp glowing over the reading corner. It was quiet, still smelling faintly of crayons and construction paper. She noticed it immediately, the wall near the window. The one that had been cracked for years, patched but never fully fixed. Now freshly painted, white, smooth, and in the center, in careful dark blue letters, "This place stays open." S. W. S. W. W. Grace covered her mouth with her hand. The words blurred as her eyes filled again. Behind her, a floorboard creaked. She turned. Sam stood in the doorway, his coat unbuttoned, paint still drying on his fingertips. "I didn't know if you'd come in here," he said softly. Grace laughed, a breathless, trembling sound halfway to a sob. "You painted it yourself?" He lifted his hands helplessly. "I'm out of practice." She shook her head, wiping her cheeks. "It's perfect." Their eyes met, really met for the first time since everything fell apart. And instead of guilt or fear or hesitation, she saw something open and raw and real in his expression. They both laughed through tears, hers falling freely, his shining but unhidden. For a moment, the library breathed around them. Warm, safe, familiar. A place that held stories of loss and healing long before theirs had walked through the door. Grace stepped a little closer. Sam didn't move away. The crack in the wall was gone. But what it represented, the breaking, the rebuilding, the promise lingered in the air between them, and neither of them wanted to walk away first. The library felt different now. Not louder, not brighter, just more alive. The way a house feels after someone finally comes home. Warmth pulsed through the vents in soft waves, thanks to the repaired boiler humming steadily in the basement. New shelves lined the east wall, still smelling faintly of fresh pine. Children's artwork hung proudly in the reading corner paper, turkeys with lopsided feathers, snowflakes cut by small, uncertain hands. It was early December, and Maple Ridge was wrapped in the kind of cold that made breath hang like smoke. Night fell fast this far north, sinking the town into darkness before most people finished dinner. By the time the last patrons drifted out of the library, scarves wrapped high and boots crunching snow, the sky outside had already turned indigo. Grace and Sam stayed behind. They'd fallen into an easy rhythm these last few weeks, working side by side without needing to announce it or question it. Grace checked in returned books. Sam carried stacks to their shelves like he'd been doing it all his life. He wasn't graceful about it, he shelved things too high, squinted at tiny Dewey Decimal labels, sometimes mixed up fiction and nonfiction, but he moved through the aisles like someone who finally felt welcome. The lights in the library dimmed automatically at 6. Soft, warm lamps flickered on above the tables. The effect felt almost magical. Grace tucked a strand of hair behind her ear as she worked through a stack of large print novels. "You're getting better at this," she said lightly. Sam looked up from his own cart of returns. At shelving books? At not putting mysteries in the gardening section. He feigned offense. "In my defense, that author could have written about gardening." Her name sounded earthy, Grace snorted, the sound echoing softly between the aisles. "Earthy? Like someone who composts." She shook her head, laughing under her breath. He gave a small smile, a quiet one, but the kind that softened the hard lines around his eyes. They worked in silence for a moment, each shelving a book here, adjusting a spine there. Outside, wind pressed faintly against the old windows. Snow tapped the glass in gentle rhythms. After a moment, Sam spoke, his voice low. "I don't think I ever thanked you properly." Grace paused mid-shelve. "For what?" "For letting me come back here," he said. "For letting me try again. She slid the book fully into place. You earned your way back. People see that. What about you? His eyes searched hers. Do you see that? Grace looked down, her fingers lightly tracing the worn edge of a hardcover. I see someone who's trying. And someone who doesn't run away anymore. Sam's jaw tightened, not with defensiveness, but with something quieter. The overhead lights glowed dimmer as they reached the far end of the library, where the aisles narrowed and the air felt cooler. The mystery section was tucked there, a quiet nook where fewer patrons wandered after dark. Grace lifted her next stack of books, but Sam set his down gently on the nearest shelf. Grace, there's something I want to give you. She blinked. You didn't have to get me anything. It's not new, he said, not even close. From his bag, he pulled out a thin, worn paperback, the kind too fragile to circulate anymore. Tan cover, frayed edges, pages yellowed like autumn grass. Grace recognized the title instantly. The Light Between Quiet Places. Margaret loved this book. Sam nodded. His thumb brushed over the faded cover. She carried it with her everywhere during our first years together. Wrote notes in the margins. Underlined passages she liked. He hesitated. I wasn't going to bring it in, I almost left it in the car. He handed it to her. Grace opened the front cover slowly. The inscription was still there, written in looping, feminine handwriting. To build a life among books and people, that's all I ever wanted. M. But something else lay nestled inside the pages now. A small box. Not velvet, not silver. Just a simple wooden box, smooth from handling, edges worn soft by time. Grace looked up at Sam, startled, breath caught. He swallowed, his expression unsteady but resolute. He stepped closer, voice dropping to barely more than a whisper. This place saved me once, he said. And you saved me again. Grace, I couldn't save Margaret, and I can't undo what I've done in the past. But with you? His voice cracked gently, almost reverently. With you, I feel like I've finally been handed a second chapter. Her breath trembled. He opened the little box. Inside lay a ring. Not flashy, not expensive. Simple, brushed gold with a narrow band, the kind someone chooses not to impress, but to promise. Sam held her gaze. Would you consider writing it with me? Grace stared at him, stunned, overwhelmed, heart pounding so hard she felt it in her fingertips. She let out a breathless laugh, half disbelieving, half overflowing. You're asking me to marry you, she managed, voice shaking. In the mystery aisle? Sam gave a sheepish smile, eyes warm. It seemed fitting. We've both been a mystery to ourselves for too long. Grace felt her throat tighten. She pressed a hand to her chest, breath catching. Yes, she whispered. Then again, firmer. Yes. Sam let out a long, relieved exhale, the kind that only comes after years of holding one's breath. Grace slipped into his arms as naturally as turning a page. His chin rested against her hair. Her hands curled into the fabric of his sweater, between the shelves surrounded by paperbacks, dust motes, and the quiet hum of a place that had held them both through grief and healing. She became his fiancée. Outside, snow kept falling. Inside, the library glowed. And in that warm, narrow aisle, a new story began. Winter came slowly to Maple Ridge that year, layering the town in soft white like someone had draped a thick quilt across the rooftops. Snow gathered on the library's awnings, on the old brick walkway, on the branches of the maple trees that creaked gently in the wind. Inside, the library glowed. Warm light spilled from the lamps in the reading nooks, reflecting off new shelves and freshly painted walls. The building hummed with the low, constant sound of life pages turning, soft conversations, children's giggles echoing behind the stacks. The newly renamed Whitlock Holloway Reading Room was full to the brim. Kids sat in beanbag chairs shaped like giant blueberries, flipping through picture books. A group of retirees gathered around the new computer station, tentatively poking at keyboards, laughing at their own mistakes. A teenage boy studied for his GED near the window, earbuds in, head bent in quiet determination. And in the middle of the reading room, on a colorful rug depicting all 50 states, Grace and Sam sat cross-legged, helping a little girl assemble a jigsaw puzzle of the country. Grace held up a Texas-shaped piece. This one goes somewhere warm, I promise. The little girl squinted at the puzzle. Down here! She clicked it in triumph. Sam grinned. Well done, Lily. At this rate, you'll finish the whole country before I finish. He looked helplessly at two pieces shaped like Utah and Colorado. Whatever these are supposed to be. Grace elbowed him gently. Geography was never your strong suit. I'm offended, Sam said, though he didn't look offended at all. Lily tilted her head. Are you two married? Grace smiled, eyes sparkling. Not yet. He's still in training. Sam placed a hand dramatically over his heart. A difficult apprenticeship, but I'm committed. Lily giggled, then scampered off to show her masterpiece to the librarian's assistant. Grace watched her go, warmth spreading through her chest. The room around her pulsed with life, the kind of gentle life she'd always wanted for this town, for herself, for the kids who stepped into these walls searching for safety, or stories, or simply a warm place to sit. Sam leaned against one of the book bins, stretching his legs out. Hard to believe, isn't it? What is? She asked softly. He gestured around them, the new shelves, the lights, the activity. All of this. 6 months ago I barely remembered this room. Now I can't imagine not being here. Grace looked at him the way she'd grown used to looking at him lately, like she was still surprised to find him not just changed, but changing. Constantly. You're here 3 days a week now. Sam shrugged. Boardrooms Mondays and Fridays, libraries Tuesdays, Wednesdays and Thursdays. He paused. It's a better balance than anything I've done in years. She nudged a stray puzzle piece toward him. He met her eyes. We found one. The last of the afternoon light faded through the windows as the library emptied out. Patrons bundled up, waved goodbye, promised to return tomorrow. The hum softened. The heaters clicked on. Grace flipped the open sign to closed, locked the door, and pulled on her scarf. Ready? She asked. Sam was already holding her coat open for her. Always. They stepped outside together onto the snow-packed sidewalk. The street lamps glowed warm and golden, casting soft halos in the flurries drifting down. Their breath rose in white clouds that disappeared into the evening air. Do you ever think about that day? Grace asked as they walked. All the time, Sam replied honestly. The rock day? Is that what we're calling it? She laughed, wrapping her gloved hands deeper into her pockets. If someone had told me back then that I'd end up engaged to you, she shook her head. I would have told them they'd read one too many romance novels. Sam chuckled. If someone had told me a rock would fix my life instead of breaking it, I'd have fired them on the spot. Grace nudged him with her shoulder. You're ridiculous. And you're stubborn. It's a miracle we didn't crash into each other sooner. They turned the corner, boots crunching on snow, until they approached the crosswalk in front of the elementary school, the very same spot where everything had begun. The blinking school zone lights pulsed gently in the dusk. A group of kids hurried across the street under the flashing sign, backpacks bobbing, snow boots squeaking. Parents waited on the other side. Laughter spread across the air. Grace stopped. Sam did too. For a long moment, they simply watched. The lights blinked. The world felt still, safe. Grace squeezed Sam's hand, her voice soft but sure. Some stories really are worth the risk. He looked at her, eyes warm with the quiet certainty she'd helped him earn. Ours only started because you refused to let me hurt anyone. He brushed a thumb over her knuckles. I fell in love with that rock thrower first. She laughed, breath catching in her chest. I wasn't trying to impress you. You did anyway. They started walking again, hand in hand, heading toward the little apartment above the bakery, where the lights glowed in the frosted window and the smell of fresh bread drifted into the cold night. No fireworks, no crowds, no flashing cameras, just two people moving forward with a shared sense of purpose, steady, warm, and real. The kind of beginning that doesn't need an ending. Because some chapters aren't finished, they're simply still being written. Sometimes, healing begins where we least expect it, in the moments we react from fear, in the mistakes we wish we could take back, in the strangers we never meant to let into our lives. Grace thought the rock she threw would bring nothing but trouble. Sam thought his grief had closed every door that mattered, yet somehow, that single frightening moment at a crosswalk opened a path neither of them knew they were still allowed to walk. A path toward honesty, forgiveness, and the kind of connection that grows slowly like light returning after a long winter. Maybe that's the quiet truth we're meant to hold on to, that people aren't finished stories. They're chapters in motion. They surprise us. They redeem themselves. They choose again, even when it hurts. And sometimes, the person you meet on the worst day of your life becomes the one who reminds you that love can be gentle, purpose can be shared, and second chances are real even for those who stopped believing in them. If you're carrying something heavy today, may this story remind you, you're not done yet. Your next chapter might already be waiting. Thank you for being here with us. Truly. If you've made it to this moment, it means this story found a quiet space in your heart, and that's a gift we don't take lightly. Your presence, your time, your willingness to feel and reflect with us. Every like, every share, every subscribe isn't just a button click. It's a way of saying yes to more kindness, more compassion, more stories that remind us what it means to be human. Thank you for helping us keep these moments alive. Thank you for letting these stories walk beside you. We appreciate you deeply.